Hi, everyone. I am Scott Babwa Brennan, and I'm head of online expression policy at the Center on Technology Policy here at UNC Chapel Hill. I'm also a fellow with the Decentralized Future Council. So back years ago, it seems, in the beginning of 2021, the founder of the Metaverse NFT project purchased an NFT of the digital artwork Every Day is the First 5,000 Days for more than 42,000 Ether, which at the time was worth about $69 million. One of the most expensive NFT purchases. Now, the purchaser did not pay for the copyright to the piece, which the artist still retains. Instead, he bought this related digital asset, right, an NFT of this digital piece of artwork. And in effect, right, the sort of official digital version of the work. Now, this sale was part of a real NFT boom. Of a few years ago, that saw millions of dollars of NFTs sold, politicians selling campaign NFTs to raise money, Trump maybe being the most famous of those, and platforms integrating NFTs, especially Meta, right, which seemed to see some real value in NFTs as part of its metaverse aspirations. Now, of course, as NFTs boomed, so had the scams and fraud associated with them. And now, more recently, amid a crash in crypto more generally, right, which is at least partially a result of a handful of a couple of major very public crashes, including FTX, confidence in NFTs maybe has fallen a little bit. But also regulators around the world are now asking if and how we should be regulating NFTs. So we, that is the Center on Tech Policy, working together with the Decentralized Future Council and Foundry 10, we've gathered this fantastic panel today to discuss what's happening in NFT regulations now and where might it be headed. So we're super lucky to have first Hilary Brill, who brings decades of experience in technology law, policy, and communications as a former tech lawyer at Covington and Burling, a staffer for House Judiciary and Commerce Committee, head of PayPal and eBay government relations and policy, and clinical legal professor of American University's Tech and IP Clinic. She currently teaches at Georgetown Law School courses in IP and also tech and policy courses. She founded HTB Strategies, where she works with nonprofits and Fortune 500 companies on current tech policy issues. We also have Marina Markezic. I apologize for butchering your name. Marina is the director and co-founder of the European Crypto Initiative, a European advocacy group focused on crypto regulation. Since 2017, Marina has been working with crypto projects on governance and legal matters with a focus on decentralization, DeFi, and NFTs. Marina is an expert on the key crypto regulatory topics and follows recent regulatory developments and its influence on the industry. As a speaker at numerous blockchain and regulatory events, Marina is passionate to contribute to a dialogue for an innovation-friendly regulation. She previously led the advisory team of Blockchain Accelerator, co-founded, where she, together with the team, evaluated more than 700 white papers and business ideas. She was selected as one of the top 100 women in fintech by Lattice 80 in 2018. And finally, Ashli Weiss is an attorney at KP Law. She provides strategic counseling to high growth and technology companies. Her passion for working with cutting edge companies stems from her experience at companies that include Benefit Cosmetics, Western Digital, Tory Burch, Louis Vuitton, and Halborn, which is a 900 million Series A Web3 crypto.
90.
Web3. I'm sorry, 90. I'm so sorry. I can read, I promise. Cybersecurity company. She's particularly active in the startup community. She was a mentor at 500 Startups, a global accelerator program, and teaches through UC Hastings Law Startup Program. She's been featured in The Guardian and NBC News on intellectual property and NFTs. Okay, so thank you all again for joining us. Just to note, I will reserve some time at the end of our discussion today for audience Q&A, but for everyone out there, please feel free to submit any questions that you have as we go along to the Q&A feature in Zoom. I'll try and keep an eye out and may or may not integrate questions as we go. So, in our discussion of NFT regulation, I feel we actually need to start at the beginning here, which and just make sure we're all on the same page of what is an NFT, So Ashley, I want to start with you, and let's start at the beginning. What is an NFT? What are we talking about today?
I'll take it away, but honestly, your introduction, Scott, I think really set the stage well for what is an NFT. Almost all of us know an NFT as, a piece of artwork that's on the internet, but there's so much more to it, actually. It's a non-fungible token. I like to use my hands because I feel like it describes what an NFT is a bit more. But we've got the non-fungible token, and then we have that creative content, right? So you could think of your picture of the Bored Ape Yacht Club or any picture at all that you may see on a platform being sold as an NFT. And then we have them minted together, which then creates what most all of us know as an NFT. So you hear conversations about NFTs being used for a variety of things, but mostly it's with creative content. And that's the perspective I'll really be honing in on today as well with the regulation piece.
Okay, great. Yeah. Hillary or Marina, anything to add to that?
Well, maybe I'll just add something that is very specific to basically the work that I'm doing. I'm coming from Europe, so I'm really going to comment only from the European side. But I think what is very, very interesting is that we understand that NFTs are like something that is digital, that is mostly art, that might be using a certain ERC standards if it's on Ethereum, etc. But what we're having now, and of course we're going to debate more in the future in this call, it's more like what does the regulator think NFT is, and what we have currently in Europe is what the community thinks an NFT is, which of course we in a way understand, but then there is a legal term that is called non-fungible token, and then we're going to talk about what that means and maybe if they are different or not from how we perceive them.
I appreciate what you just said about what does society think it means and what is it really, because I like to start off saying what an NFT is not. Mm-hmm. And it is not Bitcoin. And sometimes that immediately, and not for our community and the listeners that are probably a savvy, more nuanced listening group that's joined our call, but you start with it's not Bitcoin. You start with what you said, it's non-fungible, meaning it is not fungible like a Bitcoin. It is unique. It is a specific, whether you want to call it a certificate or a mint or a verification of ownership or whatever you want to call it, it's specific. And what's really interesting, Scott, because I know I've had a great opportunity to work with you at the Decentralized Future Council, but that is one of their tenets or catchphrase that they look beyond crypto. And that's why I personally love NFTs, because it's beyond crypto. And while we're going to talk a little bit about crypto, because the two worlds absolutely, the Venn diagram, they're huge concentric circles. But the fact that NFTs really are not cryptocurrency is extraordinarily important in terms of how you regulate them, but that doesn't mean that regulations won't affect them, whether it's intentional or unintentional. So I'm glad you started with setting that table, because it seems simple, but it's unfortunately and extraordinarily not simple.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that that is the theme that we're going to continually return to here, which is these questions about definitions. How do we define legally or more colloquially define what an NFT is? Now, before we move on, I do have to ask this other question, which at least to me seems like the elephant in the room when we're talking about NFTs, which is, should we still care about them? Right? Like, after a huge amount of initial interest and excitement, some have suggested that interest in NFTs is kind of fading, right? Meta announced a couple months ago that they were discontinuing support for NFTs on both Facebook and Instagram. So where do things stand with NFTs, right? Like, were they a fad that is just fading? Like, are they still relevant? I guess I'll just throw this out to anyone who wants to jump in here.
I think here's my personal opinion. I do think that it had a high time and now it's not at that high time, but is there another high time in the future? Yes. And the reason why I think this is going to be occurring with NFTs is because I'm looking at the cycle of crypto in general. Been investing in crypto for far too many years, and I've seen the ups and I've seen the downs. Right now it's down. I do see that it's going to get more consumers in the future. I don't know the exact number, but I feel like the population penetration of NFTs is very low. So I think it can only increase. And there's a lot of money in that market. And where there's money, there's going to be sellers, there's going to be and purchasers, consumers. And I do know personally more than a handful of people that are collectors of these items as well. And they're showing them at like art studios or conferences. I mean, it's on the walls. I have one client, he's got his picture frame in the back of the wall, and it just is going through all of his collections of NFTs. So there's definitely the following. It's not as popular right now, but I do see it picking up again.
I have lots of thoughts on this, but I won't our entire hour. I love to just be professorial. I can't help it, and have to throw back at you the definition of relevance. I think if relevance meant that it was in the news every single, in the financial news or the general news, or your grandparents were talking about NFTs, which is a strange concept to begin with. No, that has faded for sure. In fact, I just did a quick search this morning to see what would come up with NFTs, and Google Trends showed that it has dropped by 83% for search interest year-on-year basis. So absolutely, that general relevance that you might define as hype and interest, I would argue that many people thought it wasn't relevant even then. I mean, because there were people who were naysayers, extraordinarily brilliant academics or people in industry were considering it irrelevant even when there was the hype. But in terms of financial relevance, has it changed? It's different. But just today, Mattel said it's releasing Fast and Furious NFTs. That's in the news right now. Starbucks released in March and it's gone up 400%. So is there financial interest? Yes, it's different. But I like to think of relevance. And this is why I always liked NFTs, and why I actually had some wonderful heated conversations with lots of people I respect during the NFT hype. Why it's so important is because people that follow tech policy, like many of us, they look at the tech, and if you just look at decades of trends, when you look at the fact that people just looked at the internet or they looked at pets.com and thought that was silly. If you look at what an NFT is and the technology, how it's built on the blockchain, it can be used as a unique identifier. There's so much potential there that we aren't even really thinking about. Yes, in the art world, but there are social impacts and social relevance that should not be ignored. There's social good for it. We're just toying with the ideas of what that means. Yes, it's being used to bring together niche communities. You can get an NFT if you're part of a DAO, or you get an NFT if you like maybe, your favorite ticket. Yes, those are niche concepts, but they're being used in many different ways. And once it becomes pretty much commonplace to start to use it with our favorite known brands, we're going to joke about these panels 10 years ago, the same way that we joke about, swear, I show this in my class every year. Kata Couric says, so tell me you're an internet expert. What is this email thing? Like, I swear that happened. So I firmly believe it will be relevant. We'll be looking at this, laughing at our, in a funny, good way about us as experts talking about NFTs. So I do think it's extraordinarily relevant from a social impact.
I want to add one thing. I'm really glad that you brought up Mattel. I actually worked on one weird aspect of that project, but NFTs, when it comes to brands, it's only a part of the story for a brand. It's used to kind of get more of a touch and feel from its consumers. Like, it's one aspect of many of the different marketing materials that a brand is putting together to create that story. And that Mattel is a really good example of what they're doing to that. And they're also targeting a certain audience. I mean, you also mentioned, grandparents. Mattel's probably not targeting grandparents, but they are targeting a certain age range that is more capable when it comes to taking on newer technologies too.
That, I think it's brilliant, because I would like to add a little bit more to the technical part of like NFTs and how those might be used in different industries or covering different needs. I like this definition of a token in general, but I think we can use it also for NFTs to a certain part, where the regulator was saying the NFTs or the tokens are in a way a container, and it really depends on what we put in them when we're assessing what their regulatory impact is going to be, or how do we regulate them. So we usually think about NFTs when we connect them to art, and this is also somehow how our European regulator thinks about it. But also we can put something else in this box, and let's think about maybe using it for regenerative finance, which is a new trend where NFTs are used when we think about CO2 emissions and, in a way, trading CO2 emissions and using this technology that is called an NFT, or it is a specific, again, ERC standard. So then what could that be from the legal point of view? We can discuss about it later. And we're also seeing a lot of NFT being used in the decentralized science or the longevity projects that we're seeing emerging lately in the last months. Especially when it comes to IP. And again, I know that we have this plan for the future discussion during this call, but the IP NFTs are something that I'm very, very interested in. And I feel like it's expanding much more towards other industries and really asking the very important questions to what are our rights, what are in which way are we transacting, and what kind of technology are we using for transacting. And again, going beyond the standards, but really looking into so many different applications of the standards.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thank you for that. I mean, I think that, I hope it's sort of one of the themes of the discussion today, which is, that in order to talk about regulation or think about regulation, in a sophisticated way, we have to get into what are what are we talking about NFTs up, right? Like different types of NFTs, the thing in the box, as you said it, right? It's going to depend on like how we treat, how we think about, how we regulate NFTs, to really get into the specifics. Okay, so with that, like, I want to turn to some questions about the current state of regulation. But to begin, I just want, maybe we can flag some of the big kind of questions or problems that regulators are considering when they're debating the need to regulate them. So like, what are the problems that regulators around the world are trying to solve, or wondering if they can weigh in to solve when it comes to NFTs? And anyone can jump in here.
I think that when NFTs are being discussed in the news and everyone is talking about it, it's definitely a time, or might be a time, when regulators are also starting thinking about what are NFTs, how are they impacting regular consumers, and are there any risks that are associated to NFTs, the way how they are issued, or the way how they are traded, and of course presented to the users. So I would say that is a very like general approach towards anything that is new, and this is also something that we have seen being a concern from the regulators. Mm-hmm.
So what are some of those risks, right? I mentioned like scams or fraud, or what else like are regulators concerned about here when it comes to NFTs?
Those definitely can be. Sorry.
No, go please. Yeah,
very shortly, but yeah, those definitely can be risks. At the same time, I feel it's such a new thing that I think it's important to understand what those are in terms of our laws that we already have in place, and then how to approach when we hear that something is happening, like a fraud. For example, if there's someone that goes to the national competent authority, for example, in Europe, and says, oh, this happened to me, can you help me, what can I do? Or you go to your lawyer, and then they're starting looking into, okay, what is even happening? What is an NFT? How can I help this person that in a way was involved in this fraudulent process?
I want to share, and I apologize because I think I have a dog in the background, and I think my dog wants to share as well. So if you hear him barking, I apologize. And I mean, you focused on concerns with NFTs, and they're legitimate concerns. I mean, I'm talking about the technology, and we're talking about the future, but that doesn't mean that appropriate guide rails and regulations and rules, and people want them. I know that there are discussions and conversations and debates, and as I was telling you even before the panel, policy folks like myself that follow this get excited by these debates because they're essential and important. But the NFT debates are very different than a lot of the debates that are going on specifically with crypto. Again, I want to define them separately. And yes, there are fraud. There are fraudulent schemes, there are scams, there are concerns about what our rights are, especially when it comes to IP and the majority of NFTs being used in an IP world. And that's an easy way to say, wait, I don't own this and you violated my copyright. There are some clear concerns that are unfortunately going to happen with any new technology that's happening. And I think some of that is frankly being addressed by the focus of legislators and regulators, at least in the US and clearly overseas, but also many industry and companies don't, I apologize for the dog, they don't want that either. They don't want to have fraud or scam or bad actors involved in this technology. I'm going to put this on mute and I apologize.
Well, I'm going to add on to Hillary because she brought up the word companies, and I feel like that is a micro level regulation or policy. It's an internal policy with these companies that will impact how consumers are using a technology, and that will impact the people that are ultimately creating these regulations as well. So we have, when it comes to NFTs, we have several different platforms, and they're tackling some of these issues that you spoke about, you know, fraud, copyright, you name it. They have to tackle it because they've got investors and they've got customers that they're trying to protect. So what are they doing? They're doing internal policies. I find that fascinating. Hillary, I find policy creation absolutely fascinating. And when it comes to the policy creating internally with these companies, which is something that I've also worked on as well, you can shape consumers' behaviors. And I'm now thinking, I had a conversation recently with someone at Google who was talking about building policy for another technology. And they have a whole team of policymakers in-house over there because they are always going, you know, to the lobbyists and with ultimately creating the regulation. So I think, sure, maybe regulation is being talked about, but I think if we wanted to get a little bit of a peek of insight of what direction that could be going to, we could look at some of the big top companies that are dabbling in NFTs, maybe even Facebook's X regulations that they had internally or policies.
Great. Yeah, that's a great point, and definitely something to consider, that we really shouldn't only be thinking about government regulation or public policy, but also, yeah, company product policy as we continue our discussion. Okay, great. So Marina, I want to turn to you. And so just a few weeks ago, the EU passed the Markets in Crypto Asset Regulation, or MiCA, one of the first major pieces of digital asset regulation in the world. So maybe you can help us out and briefly describe the main provisions of MiCA, but also focus on how does it treat NFTs? What does it say about NFTs? And what would that mean for NFTs in the EU?
Yes, absolutely. As you said, we started with MiCA very early in 2020. In 2020, in September, the first draft was published, and now we're 2023. We know that there we have the final version, and it's going to be published in the official journal of the European Union very soon, in this next month, and then it's going to be applicable, the part that talks about stablecoins, in a year, so June, July 2024, and the end of the year, the whole part of MiCA. So whoever is interested in NFTs and how MiCA does regulate NFTs, they will need to be looking into the beginning of 2025 or the end of 2024 for MiCA being applicable for anything and any product or any services that you would like to offer to the European Union market. So what MiCA does, just really briefly, is regulating and defining crypto assets. So this is in a way how we call tokens. It's a completely new group of assets. We didn't decide that most of the tokens would be or securities or commodities. We basically just came up with a completely new group of assets, which is called crypto assets. And those are usually the utility tokens that we know. There are also stable coins, but there's also NFTs that are defined within those. And we also have the regulation around crypto asset service providers that MiCA provides. So the specific part when it comes to NFTs is very curious, because I would say the NFT is mentioned, and there might be a definition of an NFT, but it's not very precise, or at least not as precise of how we define stablecoins, how we define crypto assets in general, or utility tokens. What the regulation says is that the NFTs are excluded from the regulation, but then what is really, really important for us is to understand what are NFTs and what is really excluded from the regulation and what is not regulated within MiCA. So the regulation is saying that the crypto assets that are unique and not fungible with other crypto assets, including digital art and collectibles, are not included in MiCA, so not regulated. It's very curious that the European Union is linking the name of the NFTs and the term, the legal term, to digital art and collectibles. It's kind of a connecting it with it. So basically, I would interpret that the main idea is really that we use NFTs when dealing with digital arts and collectibles. But what is very important is this differentiation between fungibility and non-fungibility, which is in a way very important when it comes to financial regulation. For example, the financial regulation in Europe does not regulate non-fungible assets, but it does regulate fungible assets. And as we know, MiCA in a way was a copy from our financial regulation, not the same, but very similar. And this is why the logic is the same. MiCA should not regulate non-fungible tokens. What is also important is that the regulator says that the value of such unique and non-fungible crypto assets is attributable to each crypto asset's unique characteristics, and of course the utility that it gives to the holder. So in a way, the unique characteristics are the ones that are important, and at the same time there is this differentiation between those non-fungible assets being numerous and being traded, and at the same time, a lot of them having similar value. So I think that there should be at least a little bit more clarity on this definition. We are looking for more clarity from our securities agencies. The European Markets Securities Agency is going to give a little bit more clarity in this secondary technical process, as we call it, that is following this finalization of MiCA. And there we're going to have a better understanding when does an NFT become so numerous or so fungible like that it might not be an NFT anymore. And we're going to look in certain numbers. So I think this is really the most important thing when we're thinking about the European regulation is, in general, in principle, NFTs are excluded, but we don't have a very, very good understanding of what NFTs are. We just know that when they become very similar to fungible tokens, so their fungibility increases, there might be a danger that they will be classified as crypto assets, which means that they will fall under MiCA and they would be regulated under MiCA. I'm going to stop here, and if you have additional questions, I'm happy to follow with answers.
Yeah, a couple of just to clarify. So, for example, like was a fractionalized NFT, where like an NFT that is like broken up and sold, like like broken up into a bunch of different pieces, like might be more considered to be more sort of fungible than non-fungible, and then might be regulated under MiCA, right? Like that's what we're talking about.
So this is also something that, yes, the regulation writes about, is the fractional parts of a unique and non-fungible crypto asset should not be considered unique and non-fungible. So the fractional parts of an NFT will most likely not be an NFT and thus not excluded. And there's another very curious part where the MiCA says that the digital representation of a physical object or a physical asset can also be seen as a unique and non-fungible if this asset is unique and non-fungible. So in a way, tokenization, we're talking a lot about tokenization. Many times it happens within NFTs, within those specific standards. And if there is a digital representation of something that is not unique, that is unique, it's also going to be unique in a digital world.
Okay, great. Now, really quick, So it's, as you said, there's a lot of sort of there's some uncertainty around how the regulations apply to NFTs. How will that be worked out? Like, is it going to be just a question of this further technical guidance? Will there likely be litigation to work out some of these questions? Like, how might we get more clarity about what is actually covered?
Yes, that's a brilliant question. So anyone can go online, read Mika. It's in English. It's really, I would say, accessible. You can read it out, but you might understand, and including me, just, partially what exactly an NFT is. Then in the second part, which is happening right now, secondary technical process, we have the discussion within the European securities market agencies, and then they will issue guidance and technical standards on specific parts. And this specific part is also going to be NFTs. So as we understand today, the tokens that we call in a society an NFT can legally currently be a financial instrument, so can be also a security, as we call them in the US. It can be a crypto asset, so regulated under MiCA, or it can be an NFT as we define it in this regulation, which means it would be excluded. And we are really looking forward to read more on the ESMA guidance, but at the same time, there will be the national competent authorities are going to be really the ones deciding and filling in those very broad terms, so like and terminology of what a non-fungible token is. And we do expect, yes, them to be also saying their own and issuing their own opinions in the future.
Great. Okay, I wouldn't be surprised if we have some additional questions maybe from the audience at the end, because it seems quite complicated. But I do want to move on and talk about regulation elsewhere as well. So Hillary, maybe you can give us a sort of like big picture overview. Like, how does the US regulate NFTs? Right? We've heard about what's going on in Europe, at least most recently. Like, what is the 30,000-foot view on NFT regulation in the US?
Sure. And I think this pattern of we've heard from Europe first is a pretty good pattern about tech policy in general with what's been happening in the US, not just for NFT regulation, or as you're saying, excluding NFT regulation, crypto regulation, but it seems that Europe has definitely led the way in a variety of different ways that we can see different things. So thank you so much for that, because I am watching that closely. Yes, in the United States, we do not have federal legislation that is specific to NFTs. And once you don't have this federal legislation, we get to look at the states. And there's very little that is specifically geared towards NFTs in terms of some of the discussions that we have with how we should regulate them. I mean, they're mentioned in certain bills, but in terms of we should research or support our digital assets, or an NFT can't be a gift for a public official in an election. I think that was just recently introduced in some states. So there isn't a focus specifically on NFTs. However, that being said, there are definitely discussions going on in Congress. There have been there is a blockchain caucus that focuses on general blockchain issues, and NFTs are discussed in that. But generally, the focus is on crypto, and on, to use our term, fungible tokens, not non-fungible tokens. And there is actually a new subcommittee that was created to discuss digital assets, and that's the Digital Assets, Financial and Technology Subcommittee. And there was just a hearing last week on the Agricultural Committee about digital assets. So there's conversations and discussions. What's very interesting is that the NFT specific movement period in the administration has been at the PTO and the Copyright Office. So there was a congressional, there was a big report by Congress about NFTs in general and what are they, so people kind of understand and know. It's publicly available. There's a CRS report on NFTs, but there was also a request by certain senators for the Copyright Office and PTO to decide, or at least look into some and give guidance on some of these questions that we've raised even on this panel, like what is an NFT and how is that connected to our IP rights, which makes sense. because that's how it's being used predominantly. And there was a notice of inquiry. Many people participated and presented comments. There were roundtables at copyright, PTO, and patent. And the discussions were what you would imagine, which is a lot of people don't understand what their rights are, and that there needs to be education, there needs to be more clarification and more guidance. So we're all waiting to see what the PTO and the Copyright Office have to say in response to that notice of inquiry. But what's interesting is that a lot of the action and movement, which this again is a general theme in tech policy, if federal is not doing much and legislation is not, and state isn't doing much, the courts definitely can step in, or you can get administrative action. And we've had quite a bit of administrative action recently from the SEC against the well-known big exchanges. And this is no surprise. There's been a movement by the SEC to quote unquote crack down on some of these exchanges. And after the SFX banking implosion, there was a lot more movement to really be active and aggressive. So there have been actions against Coinbase, against Binance, Kraken, and there has been actually, interestingly enough, Coinbase sued the SEC. So there's been litigation on the other side, and Coinbase is suing the SEC, basically saying, give us regulations, and we want certainty, and we want clarity. There was, I hate to be very political, but that's what happens when you're in DC. There is just definitely different buckets and different camps and different groups that are interested in different types of regulation, and they are quote unquote duking it out. No disrespect to UNC by saying duking it out, but they are duking it out in Congress. And I find it interesting that the first hearing, for example, of the subcommittee I mentioned on digital assets was coincidence or coordinated, the administration's attack on the digital asset ecosystem. So even the title, the House Republicans clearly are not supporting the SEC, what they are calling, I mean, it's thinly veiled. One could read this. I'm not putting words in their mouth or mouths, but that what the SEC is doing is an attack. Whereas the chairman of the SEC and traditional banking organizations might not consider this an attack, and they would consider this exactly what we should be doing, which is regulating these exchanges. So there's a lot of, not regulation, because you asked me regulation, but there's a lot of movement around regulation and the way that we do things, which compared to Europe, and they already have legislation, they're trying to figure out the next level of a definition of an NFT. We are just trying to have conversations and figure out where our policy interests are and who has what authority over NFTs or authority over cryptocurrency. So it's fun and interesting to watch, but a lot of people do want regulation and they do want certainty, and it would definitely eliminate some of this chatter and provide some relief, even one way or the other, to know, okay, are NFTs excluded from security registration requirements? Are they part of FinCEN? Are they under anti-money laundering? We don't know. We really don't know exactly where. And if Congress doesn't tell us, there'll just be a lot more work for lawyers to get to participate and try to answer these questions.
Great. Yeah. So go ahead.
I was, because right now, and this happens often whenever we have new technology, is we're using current regulations and we're applying it creatively to, the matter that we have in front of us. So we're often doing that. We're not often, that's what we're doing. And I'm curious to see what regulations may come about in terms of NFTs when it comes to possibly separating out the NFT, because we've got our non-fungible token and then we have our creative content, and that, I do see intellectual property applying to that piece of the NFT, but then I also see how, when we're minting these NFTs on the blockchain, it costs gas. Like, I think $800 was the last time I looked at it. That was a while ago, but that cost alone is not associated to the artwork that you're paying for on top of it, which is that fee for the NFT. But then the gas, that's associated because now you're minting something on the blockchain and you own that NFT. You don't own the artwork, you have a limited license to that artwork, right? But now there's ownership and there's an asset attached with that NFT. So I'm curious if the more educated that we get on what an NFT is and in defining the definition and creating that definition, like, will those regulations parse out what an NFT actually is and then apply maybe just to the token aspect? And then we'll use existing IP law for the creative piece. I don't know. But I have another thing that I want to add to this, and I am not a tax law expert, but something that I see that could be part of these regulations as well is what happens when you have an NFT on your balance sheet? How are you grappling with that from a tax law perspective? I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's something that we're going to see more conversations about too.
Great. Okay, we actually covered a lot of ground in the last couple of minutes, so I want to actually go back to several of these different topics. So actually, Ashli, you mentioned copyright and IP, and I think we should kind of drill down on this a little bit more. So we can get a sort of a sense of like, how does existing IP law or IP protections, how does that apply to NFTs? Like, does that apply to NFTs? Yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit more about specifically, what is the IP dimension here?
Sure. So we've got copyright law. So that's going to be applying to the NFT. And if the NFT actually has a trademark in there, let's say it's, I don't know, a Mattel NFT, and they have their Mattel logo in there too, then you also have a trademark element involved as well. Usually we're talking about ownership rights when it comes to NFTs and enforcement rights. If I bought a Mattel NFT, I'm pretty confident they are not giving me any ownership rights. They probably have a terms of service somewhere on their website that says it is a very limited license, that I can only use it for my personal use. Or possibly it's in the metadata of the smart contract. I've seen this one time, so that's why I'm doubting that it's in their smart contract metadata. So that's the ownership piece, right? And the ownership piece is really important because if you want to enforce for copyright or trademark infringement, you have to be the owner. So if I have that Mattel NFT and Joe down the street takes a screenshot, mints it, and now he's got it as his profile, and I spent what, $10K for this? I can't enforce it. I have to have Mattel enforce it because Mattel is the owner. So that's one struggle that we're seeing. We're already seeing this is happening, but we're up against is the ownership and the enforcement rights with the NFTs.
Hillary, do you want to?
Well, there's so much that's interesting and confusing about the NFT and IP marketplace. I mean, you mentioned I worked at eBay, and that was a platform, right, where you brought buyers and sellers together. And from the early days, and I mean, really early days of eBay, when there were things called iPods that some people may or may not remember, and there were music that you could download on it, and even little streams or videos at the time, not streams, but little videos. There was this hope and goal that there could be a digital for sale. So there might be a potential marketplace, basically like the precursor concept of what now is like an OpenSea or a Rarible or some of these NFT market, but there wasn't a way to actually show that you didn't, just copy this or rip it or whatever was going on at that time. And then there was a company that tried to do this, Redigi, and they came up with all sorts of different ways to work around this, and that didn't work. And so now we don't have individual ownership anymore of individual songs in digital world. Like we don't have a workaround. We have licensing, right? So what we've decided to do now is license music or stream or have this access. So I see NFTs and IP as a way to actually create this digital first sale or world that we never had when we were, just thinking about this concept of a platform. So I love the concept of it. I love the idea that you can have like a certificate of ownership and you can show who's had it. So you can tell whether or not it's been downloaded. And then you can, it gets rid of this concept of like somebody actually is trying to, you know, copy it and do and sell 1,000 copies of it. I love that idea. But the same thing that happened on the platform of eBay about people with potential frauds or scams, they spent a long time and did great work and continue to do great work with verifying rights owners, with all of the brands in order to make sure that what is on their site is actually true. So I feel that is happening right now on these platforms, but it just started. So give them some time. And I think it's already changed within the last year compared to what it was currently now. And in fact, Ashli was one of the first to put together what are people doing to try to make it a safe space or not so safe. And that's happening. So I think these issues that people talk about with fraud and scam and NFTs and the market's just wacky and crazy and don't do it. I think that's part of educating consumers and then having a safe space. But the idea of actually having an NFT attached to show that you own some kind of digital asset is valuable in so many different ways. And it's valuable for accessing information. We've been talking about markets and businesses, but the idea of if something's just licensed, that means that whoever controls that license has a right to take it away at any time. And there are instances where there are books that are no longer available because someone doesn't feel like licensing it. But if you actually have an NFT to access it and you have ownership of access to that book will always be there. So to get access to knowledge and information through an NFT, that's not really an IP issue. I'm sorry, I kind of went off on that, but I just think that that's really an essential and important part of this conversation that gets lost when you talk about IP and NFT, or people stealing and minting things that they shouldn't mint.
Great. Marina, do you want to jump in on this like big question of like IP protections before we move on to the last couple questions?
Yeah, just very shortly, the situation in Europe is that we have really much like focused on regulating crypto assets and then regulating NFTs within like a group of those crypto assets, but there's been no updates on the IP law. So I would say that very similarly to my colleagues here, we are applying the existing IP law when it comes to NFTs. And that's going to be like a whole different discussion, of course, and it's in a way the different regulation of the one that we were discussing before, which is the MiCA, which is a little bit more on a definition of the asset, how it is issued, and at the same time, can and in which way can it be tradable.
Great. So as I said, I want to leave some time for audience Q&A, but I do want to ask one kind of final question, which is, you know, maybe we can think a little bit more generally, a little bit more normatively, like what role should regulation play here, right? We're in this like kind of interesting time. It's you know, it's a relatively new technology. We recognize that there are some issues that could be addressed by regulation. What do y'all think? Like, what role should governments be playing here as concerns NFTs? And whoever wants to start.
I would like to start with a very simple question that we don't think we have an answer to in Europe at this moment, and is actually the fact when we tokenize something that is a physical object. And when we potentially could have a problem was that when a person owns the digital version, so a person owns an NFT within their wallet, and then another person who owns or is in a possession of the physical object. So what happens in this case? And we have, I would say, kind of a problem in Europe because certain laws are issued and accepted and finalized within the EU on the EU level, and most of them we do have, especially when it comes to contractual agreements and ownership, it's on the member state level. So there's going to be a lot of very, very interesting, I would say, cases going forward. And at the same time, I think that this definition of like fungibility, non-fungibility, this could also be something that is a very member state specific, and the part when it comes to the ownership and possession can also be very member state specific. So we are not going to be bored in the EU going forward with potential questions when it comes to NFT when there's art involved, but also more and more we see that there's a lot of interest in tokenizing real estate, in tokenizing other physical object, and you know, if we connect it somehow to the metaverse, it's going to get even more interesting. So we'll be really looking forward to those updates and new laws potentially coming up.
I think we definitely need more certainty. I think that will help both users of these digital assets and what they can and cannot do with it, as well as those that are investing in it and those that currently have businesses in NFTs. And that's what companies in general want for crypto, but that makes sense. And I think the fight definitely is going on inside you know, our own administration with crypto, right? Is it a security? Is it a commodity? How do we define it? And then you throw NFT in the mix. Is an NFT a security? Is it a commodity? Is it something else? So interestingly enough that, you know, Europe is like, it's something else, but even within that, what is that something else? What we need to know what rules apply. So, because there are good actors that want to use these types of technologies appropriately. They don't want to violate IRS tax laws. They don't want to participate unwillingly in reselling something they didn't own. So education, awareness, got absolute guide rails. We want to make sure that security, privacy concerns with NFTs are addressed. We definitely need to know what should be done and can be done in this particular area. I mean, interestingly enough, we were talking about NFTs and we were talking about IP and NFTs. Just a recent court case with Dapper Labs, which has its own NFT system. So it has its own blockchain, unlike we were talking about ERC, like most NFTs on, you know, an Ethereum platform. Dapper Labs has its own platform. They sell their own like safe, quote unquote, resale market, because you know you're getting it from Dapper Labs. Dapper Labs sells NBA Top Shots, NBA Moments. It was just considered in a motion to dismiss that was denied, saying that they could be considered a security because it's on its own platform. Because it's on its own platform, it meets certain requirements. I don't want to get too technical, but requirements of the Howey test, and all of our SEC folks will know, you know, what I'm talking about there. But that is the first time an NFT has even been considered a security. But then you would say, wait, what about all of those NFTs that are being sold right now on OpenSea that are not on Dapper's own flow system, but they're on Ethereum? What do we do with that? So it's not getting easier, it's getting more confusing. So you might even, especially with the courts coming in and doing that. So it'll be interesting. There are people who think we don't need any new rules, that the rules that exist do apply. But if they're going to apply, we need to know exactly how. We need more guidance.
Great. Ashli, anything to add?
I think I'm just going to piggyback on that education piece. I do think that before regulation is made, definitions should be a little bit more clear, and more education to really understand the technology. And I say that tongue in cheek because what's the irony in that is that takes time, and then creating regulations takes even longer time. And then when we finally have that regulation, does the technology change? So it's a really difficult matter to be tackling from the regulation side. I do see regulation coming, but my guiding words would be education, education, education.
Great. So we have 5 minutes. So please, anyone out there, if you have any questions, please put into the chat or into the Zoom Q&A feature. We have a couple already. So first, something we've been touching on a lot are NFT securities. Why or why not? So this is good. We can circle back around really to this question of should NFTs be considered securities? And whoever wants to take this one.
I guess I should say something because I just talked about it. I think that I think that there's a lot of potential, maybe intended, but I like to call them unintended consequences to the NFT world if certain SEC requirements need to be placed on an individual artist trying to mint something and sell it, as opposed to what may or may not be Dapper Labs, and I'm not even sure that should be considered a security. I think it goes down to the question of what was said before about if an NFT really is unique, that doesn't seem to me to fit the whole concept of securities. If it is a fractionalized NFT, what you mentioned before, and it's different parts of an NFT, that's a different conversation. So we started and now we're ending with how do we define non-fungible? How do we define uniqueness? If it really is fungible, then I think that's a different conversation. And so we have to be very careful about what requirements we're putting on this burgeoning potential innovative and impactfully, in a positive way, use of NFTs.
Maybe I can add that Mika does say that we, national competent authorities, should apply substance over form, which in a way means that an NFT can be anything, as I mentioned before. But usually I would say that most of the NFTs we know today could be crypto assets, if from the legal point of view, or defined as an NFT, again, from the legal point of view. Again, we don't have the clarity on what uniqueness means and how many NFTs should be issued by one platform, how much should they cost, and where this limit is. But I'm really looking, again, forward to understanding more from ESMA, from our authority. But I would say that most of the ones that we know will most probably not be security, but they will be, if they are not NFTs, they will be crypto assets.
Great. Okay, next question. Should there be licenses required to run an exchange of NFTs?
Maybe I can go here. The Mika usually defines exchanges as the ones for not non-fungible, but for fungible assets, so crypto assets. But we have recently had Digital Services Act finalized. That is, in a way, the act that helps with the rules around digital platforms, and those might be, I mean, the Digital Services Act might be regulating some of the NFT platforms. And I invite anyone that works on an NFT platforms to take a look into the Digital Services Act. We are not, of course, 100% clear yet, because there needs to be more clarity and understanding, again, also from the secondary technical point of view, but also from different agencies that will do the oversight. But that could be potentially an additional regulation that would be important for platforms issuing NFTs in the EU.
Great. Well, that's unfortunately all the time that we have. So I just want to thank each of our panelists again. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. And for the audience, thank you for attending. And we at Center on Technology Policy often hold these sorts of talks, these sorts of panels. So please keep an eye out for future events.